6 church women had my teenage daughter cornered, surrounding her like predators, calling her unchristian, selfish, and heartless. They had no idea I was already running toward them, or that within 1 week, their entire church would be holding him books filled with the truth I'd been forced to stay silent about. If they wanted a holy war, they picked the wrong mother. If you believe no one protects with more fire than a mother pushed too far, hit that like button and subscribe to the Betrayal Diaries. Today's story is about lies, manipulation, and the quiet revenge that dismantled an entire facade. Now, let me tell you what really happened. I never imagined that losing my husband, the man I'd built nearly half my life beside, would come with so much chaos. And I don't mean grief or shock or the numbness that settles into your bones after tragedy. I mean chaos. Twisting, messy, cruel chaos inflicted by the very people who should have stepped up with compassion. My daughters, Lena and Sophie, were 16 and 14 when their father, Douglas, died in the accident. Teenagers, old enough to feel every fracture of betrayal, still young enough to be wounded by it in ways that linger. And betrayal did come. Not the kind you recover from easily. Because 2 days after Douglas died, the truth spilled out. He'd been having a long-term affair. Not a fling. Not a one-time lapse. A second life. And that second life had produced 2 little boys, babies, who were left orphaned when their mother died in the same accident. And somehow, despite all of this, despite the pain my girls carried, even though I was in the middle of divorcing him because they had discovered the cheating, his parents blamed us. Let me paint the picture. My ex-in-laws, Walter, 78, and Ruth, 80, had always been difficult, cold, judgmental. The kind of people who smile with their mouths but not their eyes. They tolerated me when I married their son, adored him blindly, and treated my daughters like accessories to his legacy rather than human beings. And after his death, that blind adoration became delusion. Because suddenly, they wanted custody of my daughters. As if they hadn't spent years criticizing their every breath, comparing them to some imaginary perfect grandchildren who lived only in Ruth's imagination. But it didn't stop there. They also wanted to move in with us. Into my home. My space. My girls' refuge. No, I told them. That's not happening. Well, they didn't like that. They interpreted boundaries as rebellion. Grief as disobedience. Independence as disrespect. And as the weeks passed, I could feel them tightening their grip, convincing themselves, and anyone who'd listen, that they were saints and that I was some cruel gatekeeper keeping them from their rightful family. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. It was a Saturday in early spring, the kind where the air smells like fresh bread and citrus. The local weekend market had always been our happy place. Warm pastries, local honey, farmers selling fresh eggs and herbs. For my youngest daughter, Sophie, it was paradise. And since it was her birthday week, I'd given her a small budget to roam alone and pick out whatever treats she wanted. She was radiant, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. After an hour, when she didn't come back, I wasn't worried. Sophie gets lost in joy easily. But then my phone rang. When I heard her voice, shaken, trembling, thick with held-back tears, my entire body went cold. Mom, some women, they won't let me leave. I swear, I dropped everything. Didn't care that I nearly left my wallet at the fruit stand. I grabbed my eldest daughter, Lena, and we ran. Not walked. Ran. And then I saw them. 6 older women, all in their Sunday best even though it was Saturday, were surrounding my 15-year-old daughter near the honey stall. Their voices were raised, sharp, judgment dripping like venom. Unchristian behavior. Your poor grandparents. Your baby brothers need you. Your mother is poisoning you. I didn't see red. I saw white, the kind of cold, blazing white that lives just before lightning hits. Lena moved first. Mom. Get your sister, I said. Take her things. Go to the car. Then I stepped between those women and my daughter. I didn't yell at first. I didn't need to. Back up, I said softly, but the softness wasn't warmth, it was a warning. One of them, a woman I vaguely recognized from my ex-in-law's church, scoffed at me. We are trying to guide your daughter. She's turning her back on family. Family? I repeated. You don't get to harass a child and call it guidance. She should visit her grandparents. They are heartbroken and homeless, another one thundered, for the whole market to hear. They are 8 miles away in a perfectly good, fully furnished home, I snapped. Let's not pretend they're wandering the streets. Another woman stepped forward with a trembling Bible between her hands. The Lord commands you to honor your elders, to submit to your husband's parents. My husband cheated on me, I said, and died before the divorce was finalized. No one is submitting to anyone. They gasped, every one of them, like I had spit in the baptismal font. You are unchristian, one hissed. Unholy. You disobeyed your marriage vows. You turned your children against their grandparents. And the worst one whispered like poison from the ringleader. You're making your daughters selfish, just like you. That one cut. It cut deep. Because my girls, my brave, wounded girls, were the farthest thing from selfish. I stepped so close to the woman that her smug smile faltered. Touch my daughters again, I said quietly, and your entire church will know exactly what your sweet, saintly friends have been hiding for years. But they didn't move. Didn't back down. They only got louder. It was the screaming, their frantic, finger-pointing chaos, that finally drew security. We were escorted out, dragged away from the market like disturbers of peace. And those women followed me all the way to my car, shouting their sanctimonious nonsense until I shut the doors in their faces. Sophie sobbed quietly the whole drive home. Lena stared out the window, jaw tight, hands trembling in her lap. I didn't sleep that night, because something in me clicked into place. A line had been crossed. A deep, ancient, maternal line. And I knew exactly what I had to do. After the girls went to bed, I turned on my laptop. My hands were still shaking, not with fear anymore, but with purpose. I messaged someone from that same church, someone fair, someone who actually had a conscience. And when he told me what my ex-mother-in-law had posted about us, I felt my stomach turn. Pages and pages of lies. Claims that we abandoned them. That we stole money from them. That my daughters were heartless. That I didn't want my husband's surrogate babies because they were boys. I had proof, mountains of proof, that Douglas's surrogate was just the woman he cheated with. Proof that his parents knew. Proof they'd supported it. Proof they'd blamed my daughters for telling me. Proof they'd called my girls bastards. Proof they'd accused them of causing their father's death. And if the church wanted to weaponize self-righteousness, fine. I'd hand them the ammunition they unknowingly prayed for. And on that night, I started planning my revenge, carefully, methodically, page by page. That night, after the girls finally drifted into a restless sleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the soft glow of my laptop screen. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. It was the kind of silence that used to comfort me. But now it felt like the breath before a storm. I kept seeing Sophie's face. Her wide, frightened eyes. Her fingers were trembling around the chocolate she never even got to enjoy. The way she pressed herself against me, embarrassed and shaken, like she'd done something wrong. She hadn't. They had. And the more I thought about it, the more something inside me hardened. Not anger. Not rage. Resolve. I opened my messages and pulled up the conversation with the church contact, a man who had always been kind to us back when Douglas dragged us to Sunday services. He was older, thoughtful, the kind who listened before speaking. His reply came fast. Almost too fast. Harper, I am so sorry. You need to know something. I braced myself. When the full truth spilled out, it felt like watching a slow-motion train crash, ugly, inevitable, and devastating in a way that made my fingers go numb against the keyboard. My ex-mother-in-law had been busy. Very busy. She had posted a story, a long, dramatic, manipulative retelling of our lives on the church's private Facebook group. She wrote about how I had cast them aside, how I refused to embrace their grandsons, how I left them homeless and heartbroken. She even claimed I had rejected God's blessings after failing to carry children beyond my 2 daughters, and that the affair partner had been a surrogate angel sent to expand their family. My stomach turned. The absurdity would have almost been laughable if it hadn't been so cruel. She knew the truth. She knew everything her son had done. She knew he'd cheated. She knew those boys weren't miracles, they were consequences. And she still weaponized the story and twisted it into something unrecognizable. Worse, people believed her. Some of the church women have been talking, my contact typed. They're organizing support. They think your daughters need guidance. They think you've turned them away from their family. Support. That word sent a shiver through me. Support was what cornered my daughter in the market. Support was what screamed in her face. Support was what followed us to the car like vultures looking for a carcass. I sat back in my chair, pressing my palms into my eyes. There's a moment every parent experiences, a moment where fear stops mattering, where hesitation dissolves, where instinct takes over completely. For me, that moment came right then, in the glow of that kitchen light. If they wanted to drag my daughters through the mud, if they wanted to rebrand lies as righteousness, if they wanted a crusade, then they were about to learn what it felt like when the truth came marching in. Because I had the one thing they didn't. Receipts. All of them. From the divorce. From the affair. From the bullying. From the harassment. From the messages they thought I would never share. And for the first time since Douglas died, I allowed myself to remember something. I wasn't powerless. I hadn't been powerless in years. I'd raised my daughters alone in every way that mattered emotionally, financially, mentally, while their father chased distractions and their grandparents pretended not to know. I was the breadwinner. I was the caretaker. I was the one who stayed. And I would be damned before I let these people corner my children in public and call them unchristian. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I drove straight to the nearest print shop. The clerk behind the counter, a gentle older man with wire-framed glasses, didn't question me when I asked for high-quality prints, glossy, thick paper, the kind people use for professional brochures. He just nodded, took the files I uploaded, and said, "Give me about an hour." That hour was the longest of my life. My hands kept drifting to my phone, scrolling through old messages I'd tried so hard to forget. Even reading them again, even after all this time, hurt. There it was. Douglas is kissing the woman in our living room. His messages begged her to meet him. His parents' texts called his affair a mistake, but understandable. Their messages called my girls bastards. Their accusation, 2 days after he died, that my daughters killed their father by telling me the truth. Some wounds don't fade, no matter how much therapy or time you throw at them. They sharpen. When the prints were ready, the clerk placed the thick stack in my hands carefully, as if handing over something fragile. "Hope everything works out for you," he said. I didn't tell him the truth. I didn't tell him that things were about to work out magnificently. At home, I spread everything across my dining table. The glossy photographs reflected the sunlight pouring through the window. Rows of messages, screenshots, and evidence lay like puzzle pieces on the wooden surface. Then I got to work assembling the binders. Not sloppily. Not angrily. Calmly. Deliberately. Matching covers to pages. Aligning photos. Adding a soft introduction page in each, a hymn booklet design almost identical to the ones the church used. And then, the opening picture. Douglas and the affair partner are kissing on my couch. Her name under her face. His under him. The title beneath them. A love story conceived in lies. When I finished the first binder, I closed it gently and let my fingers rest on the white cover. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like defense. A shield. A way to stop the knives aimed at my daughters. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, I drove to the church. There was no one in the lobby yet, just a side door propped open for early volunteers. And there it was. The desk with the hymn books. One of the women had once bragged that nobody ever checked them, people simply grabbed one and slid into a pew. Perfect. One by one, I placed the binders into the stack. They blended in beautifully. Almost too beautifully. For a moment, I stood there, listening to the quiet echo of the empty sanctuary. The stained glass windows glowed faintly with dawn light. Somewhere, a heating unit hummed. Then I walked out. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. By the time the congregation gathered, by the time hands reached into the familiar stack of hymn books, The truth would be in every lap. I didn't wait for the explosion. I didn't have to. The church grapevine is faster than the internet. My phone started vibrating before I even got home. 9 missed messages. 4 people I barely knew. 2 from those same women who cornered my daughter. 1 from Ruth, my ex-mother-in-law, though I didn't bother opening it. And from my contact at the church. Harper, what did you do? Everything is chaos. I simply placed my phone face down on the counter and poured myself a glass of iced tea. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through glossy paper, tucked quietly into a place where only the truth belongs. I drove home with my jaw tight, my eyes burning, and a pressure in my chest that felt like it was trying to claw its way out. My daughters were quiet in the back seat, too quiet. I could see them through the rearview mirror, my oldest staring out the window, her mouth set in that stubborn line she gets when she's trying not to cry, and my youngest chewing on the inside of her cheek the way she did when she was 5 and terrified of the dark. And all I could think was, they did this. Those women. My late husband's parents. Their poisonous stories and twisted pity parties. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to fade away on its own. This wasn't something we could move past. This was a war they'd brought straight to my children. And I was done being polite. The house felt hollow when we walked in, like the echoes of the day followed us through the door. My girls went to their rooms without me asking. Usually they'd linger, ask what movie we were watching or what was for dinner. But today, they carried an invisible weight uphill, step by step. I stood alone in the kitchen, resting both hands on the counter, breathing slow so I wouldn't punch something. You'd think after losing my husband, after learning everything he'd done, after the funeral, after the legal nightmare, I'd be numb to shock. But watching a circle of grown women corner my daughter in a public market, hearing them spit their judgment at her like she was some kind of criminal, that hit a different part of me. A dangerous part. When the house finally went still, I grabbed my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was about to find, but I had a feeling it would be worse than I imagined. And oh, it was. The church Facebook group wasn't private. My ex-mother-in-law never learned what the word privacy meant. And there it was, her masterpiece of manipulation. Paragraph after paragraph painting herself as a saintly, abandoned grandmother. My daughters were lost lambs. I was cold. And the 2 baby boys, the ones my daughters discovered hiding in their father's secret life, were her sweet grandchildren stolen by a cruel system. But the part that made my blood go cold? She claimed the boys were the result of a surrogate we hired because I was no longer able to give her son more children. I sat back in my chair. For a moment, I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. Couldn't breathe. And then the heat rose, slow and steady, from my stomach up through my chest until my hands shook over the keyboard. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped into perfect alignment. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. But not the loud kind. Not the screaming in a public market kind. No. If my ex-in-laws loved their church reputation so much, if that Facebook post was their shining altar, I was going to burn it down. Not out of pettiness. Not out of spite. For my daughters. For the peace they deserved. For the years of manipulation, guilt, and judgment we'd endured in silence. I closed my laptop slowly, almost gently. Tomorrow, I thought, sitting in the soft glow of the kitchen light. Tomorrow, everything changes. That night, sleep came in pieces. Every time I drifted off, the image of those women circling my daughter jolted me awake again. I heard her voice in my head, shaky, scared, cracking under pressure. Mom, they won't let me leave. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, planning every step like a chess match. Every move had to be precise. Controlled. Undeniable. No shouting. No threats. No scenes. Just truth. Presented in such devastating clarity that even the most hardened church gossip wouldn't be able to twist it. By sunrise, the plan was locked. After getting the girls off to school, I pulled every file, every document, every message I had saved from the divorce process. My late husband's affair had been messy, and he hadn't been careful. There were receipts, messages, photos, everything. I told myself at the time I kept them for legal protection. But now? Now they were something else. They were justice. I spent hours organizing everything. Printing, sorting, highlighting. Each ugly detail placed with care. Every lie his mother told had a matching, irrefutable truth. And when I assembled the binders, white covers, clean fonts, neatly labeled, there was an eerie calm in me. Not anger. Not adrenaline. Just focus. My favorite part was the first page. A full-color, high-resolution photo of my late husband and his affair partner kissing in our living room. The caption underneath, written in looping cursive, the true story of a marriage broken, not by us, but by the sins they hid. When everything was ready, I placed the binders in my passenger seat like fragile, precious cargo. And I drove. The church stood quiet in the morning light. A peaceful facade for a place that had become a breeding ground for judgment, whispers, and self-righteous cruelty. Inside the front entrance was the table where visitors grabbed their hymn packets. No one watched it. No one guarded it. Perfect. I took a breath and placed the binders neatly in the stack, spaced evenly so people would assume they belonged. And then I walked out. No drama. No confrontation. No grand announcement. Just the truth, left in plain sight. But the fallout? That would be far from quiet. And later that evening, when the first message hit my inbox, written by a woman I barely remembered from years ago, filled with shock and apology, I knew the wildfire had begun. The church had discovered the binders. And for the first time in years, justice wasn't creeping toward us. It was sprinting. By the next morning, the wildfire had grown into a full blaze. I woke up to 4 new messages, 2 missed calls, and a wall of notifications from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The first message I opened was long paragraphs of disbelief and sympathy, but one line stood out. Harper, people were passing those binders around the pews like it was breaking news. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, heartbeat steady. Not triumphant. Not gloating. Just settled. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like someone was tightening a rope around my life. The truth was finally louder than the lies. When I went downstairs, the girls were already getting ready for school. My oldest was at the coffee maker pouring herself hot chocolate the way she always did, 2 scoops of powder and a splash of milk. My youngest was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone, her hair messy from sleep, her expression softer than it had been in days. She glanced up. "Mom," she said quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Did something happen? Online?" She held out her phone, the screen showing a text from a friend. "OMG, your grandma is melting down on Facebook." I took a deep breath. Something happened. But you don't need to worry. I handled it. My oldest looked up from her mug, eyebrows raised. Handled it how? I smiled a little. With facts. And with the truth. Which is something your grandparents don't like very much. They exchanged glances, concerned, but curious. I didn't want to drag them into every detail, not when they were just beginning to heal. But I wanted them to know one thing. No one, I said softly, is ever going to corner you again. Not physically, not emotionally, not in some market, not at church, nowhere. I promise you that. My youngest bit her lip, then suddenly got up and hugged me. My oldest followed without a word. And for a moment, the kitchen felt lighter. After they left, I opened Facebook, not something I enjoyed doing, but today I had a feeling it'd be worth it. And oh, it was. The church Facebook group was in chaos. People were arguing in the comments, quoting scripture at each other, demanding explanations from my ex-in-laws. Some were shocked. Others angry. A few were stunned into silence. But the overwhelming reaction? Betrayal. They weren't betrayed by me. They weren't betrayed by my daughters. They were betrayed by the elderly couple who had manipulated them into harassing a grieving family. At the top of the page was the post I expected, the meltdown my youngest had seen. My ex-mother-in-law had typed a frantic wall of text. She claimed the binders were fabricated. She said the photos were staged. That her son loved his wife deeply, and that I had created lies out of bitterness. But right under her post was a comment from someone I remembered vividly, Mrs. Carmichael, a retired nurse with a spine made of iron and a tongue that didn't tolerate nonsense. Her comment was brutal. I was the one who helped your husband into the ambulance after his fall, and even then he was talking about sorting his mess out before Harper found everything. Don't you dare pretend he was some saint. 32 likes. Then another comment. Why are there screenshots with your phone number encouraging the affair? Explain that. Then, you owe these girls an apology. Then, shame on you both. Each comment felt like the slow, steady cracking of a foundation that had held far too long. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By mid-afternoon, the messages from church members started taking a different tone, apologetic, embarrassed, some even remorseful. We had no idea. I'm so sorry for what happened to your daughters. We were misled. Your mother-in-law has caused a lot of harm. A few even admitted they had been part of the group that harassed my daughter at the market. They apologized too. Some apologies were heartfelt. Some felt forced. Some felt like they were trying to save face. But none of it mattered. The truth was out. The damage done to my daughters was finally being acknowledged. And the people who hurt them were facing the consequences. Late that afternoon, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it. But something told me to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear. Hello. There was a pause. A shaky breath. Harper, it's me. My stomach tightened. My voice cooled instantly. Hello, Evelyn. My ex-mother-in-law's voice was thin, shaking, desperate in a way I had never heard before. How could you do this? She said. We are being shunned. People won't sit with us. We are being humiliated. Your daughters won't even look at us. We are old. We have no one left. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter. You cornered my child at a market, I said quietly. You called my daughters horrible names. You lied about me. You tried to turn your entire church against us. That's not, she began. It's exactly what happened. Her breathing became heavier. We are alone. We have been abandoned. You. No, I said, cutting in sharply. You did this. Not me. You. Silence. You could have chosen kindness, I continued. You could have chosen honesty. You could have chosen to heal with us, not hurt us. But instead you chose cruelty. And now you're shocked that people finally see you for who you are. Another pause. Then a whisper. Your girls, they were supposed to forgive us. They don't owe you forgiveness, I said. And neither do I. Her voice cracked. You've destroyed us. No, I replied, my voice steady and calm. I simply stopped protecting you from the truth. She didn't speak again. The line stayed quiet for a good 10 seconds. Then she hung up. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension roll off my shoulders. It was done. But as I set my phone down, something unexpected washed over me. Not gloating. Not triumph. Just relief. Not because they were shunned. Not because the binders worked. Not even because the church finally saw the truth. But because for the first time since the funeral, my daughters were safe. By dinner, the girls were laughing again. My youngest told me about a boy in her English class who tried to impress her by juggling oranges. My oldest asked if we could do homemade pizza next weekend. The air felt easier. Softer. And I knew deep down that whatever came next, whatever lawsuits or messages or drama my ex-in-laws might try to stir again, we weren't afraid anymore. They had lost their power. And we had reclaimed ours. The next few days moved in slow waves, like the quiet after a storm when you're still waiting to see if another thunderclap will follow. The girls slipped back into their routines: school, homework, teenage chatter, and I let myself pretend, for small pockets of time, that our lives were normal again. But the ripples of what I'd done were still moving through the community. On Wednesday morning, while I drank coffee and checked emails, another message popped up, this time from someone I never expected. Pastor Franklin. A man who had once shaken my hand every Sunday with a warm smile, but who did nothing when the rumors about me and my daughters began. A man who knew exactly how strict his church was about infidelity, and yet allowed my mother-in-law's sob story to spread unchecked. His message was formal, overly polite, and dripping in that pastoral concern tone I knew too well. Harper, I would appreciate a moment of your time. There are matters we need to discuss regarding recent events. I stared at the screen, took a long sip of coffee, and then typed back. What matters? His response came almost instantly. It would be best to speak in person. Absolutely not. I wasn't walking into that building alone, giving those people the satisfaction of seeing me uncomfortable, or allowing another ambush in the name of Christian fellowship. So I answered. I prefer to keep communication in writing. There was a pause. I could picture him sitting in his little office oak desk, cross on the wall, blinds slightly tilted, debating how to maintain control. Then his reply. Harper, while I support transparency, the way this situation was handled has caused significant disruption within the congregation. The binders were inflammatory. I felt a slow, sarcastic smile spread across my face. Inflammatory. Yes. So is being chased through a market by a pack of older women calling my daughter unchristian. I typed back. The truth can be inflammatory, especially when people lie. He didn't respond for 2 minutes. Then, I understand you were hurt, but public humiliation is not the way of the church. I actually laughed. Out loud. Because the church had allowed my ex-mother-in-law to do exactly that, humiliate me, shame my daughters, spread lies to dozens of people, and no one said a thing. But the moment they became the punchline, now it was unacceptable. I typed one final message. Pastor, you're welcome to discuss this with the police, the court, or my attorney. But not with me. Have a good day. And I blocked the number. A deep sense of satisfaction settled in my chest, not fiery or vengeful, but firm, grounded, long overdue. These people had played judge and jury for months. Now they could deal with the consequences. The girls got home that afternoon buzzing with updates from school. Apparently, the church gossip had trickled into the student body. The teenagers whose grandparents attended the services were full of whispered disbelief. My oldest dropped her bag on the counter and said, Mom, this girl I barely know came up to me today and said, I'm sorry your dad was terrible. I blinked. What did you say? She shrugged. I said thank you. She looked like she was going to cry. She opened the fridge. But then 2 others told me their grandparents think Grandma Evelyn should be banned from bingo night. I choked on my water. My youngest looked up from her cereal. Wait, Grandma Evelyn plays bingo? She cheats at bingo, my oldest said dryly. I've seen it. We all laughed. For the first time in what felt like forever, our house was full of something besides worry. The humor was a little dark, a little sharp, but it was real. Healing. Human. And I realized, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were taking our lives back. That night, after they went to bed, I sat on the couch with the TV muted and the house quiet. My mind drifted to the past year, the funeral, the betrayal, the custody attempts, the fear, the harassment. Grief and betrayal make strange bedfellows. They twist together until you can't tell which one is crushing you more. I had spent so long reacting, cleaning up the mess left behind by a man who had torn our family apart long before he died. By parents who wanted control, not healing. By a community that judged before asking questions. But now, for the first time, I had acted. Deliberately. With purpose. On my own terms. And the fallout was exactly what it needed to be. For us. For my daughters. For the truth. I leaned back against the couch cushions, closed my eyes, and breathed. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, angry posts, dramatic phone calls, maybe even more church drama. But I knew this. Nothing they did could scare me anymore. Because for the first time in over a year, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the night police knocked on my door to tell me my ex-husband was gone. Control. Real, steady, bone-deep control. And as I sat there in the dim glow of the living room lamp, wrapped in a silence that finally felt peaceful rather than threatening, something inside me shifted. The fear that had kept me small, the guilt that wasn't mine to carry, the exhaustion of constantly protecting my daughters from people who should have loved them, every bit of it began to dissolve. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a split second, my stomach tightened, instinctively bracing for another wave of chaos. But when I picked it up, the the notification wasn't from my ex-in-laws or from a member of their church. It was a message from Mark, the kind, older church member who'd tipped me off in the first place. Harper, things are getting loud over here. You might want to stay offline tonight. But I thought you should know, people are furious at your XML. And they're defending your girls. Just thought you'd want to hear that. I stared at the message, a slow, warm relief spreading through my chest. Support. Not pity. Not judgment. Support. I typed back a simple, "Thank you. Truly." Then I set my phone down again and let the quiet settle around me. Upstairs, I could hear the faint, comforting sound of my oldest daughter turning over in her bed. The soft creak of her mattress. A muffled sigh. Then the tiniest laugh from my youngest. She was watching something funny on her phone, trying not to be loud. Life. Normal life. Something we hadn't had in far too long. I pushed myself off the couch and walked softly down the hallway, pausing at their door. I didn't open it. I didn't want to interrupt their moment, but I leaned my forehead against the frame and let the warmth fill me. They were okay. Despite everything. Despite the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, the loss. They were okay. And maybe I was too. When I finally went to bed, pulling the blankets up and sinking into the mattress, I didn't fall asleep right away. My mind wandered, not with anxiety, but with clarity. For the first time, I saw my ex-husband's parents exactly as they were, stripped of excuses, stripped of the roles I once tried so desperately to believe they filled. They weren't grieving grandparents. They weren't loving elders. They were people who had spent years hiding behind reputation and righteousness while quietly harming anyone who didn't bow to them. And I was done bowing. I closed my eyes with a calm I hadn't felt in months. If tomorrow brought more drama, so be it. If tomorrow brought apologies, even better. But no matter what came, I finally believed something I should have believed long ago. We didn't deserve their cruelty. And they didn't deserve our silence. With that thought steady in my chest, I drifted into the first peaceful sleep I'd had since before the world fell apart. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew. Tomorrow wasn't going to scare me. Not anymore. The sun woke me the next morning before my alarm did. Soft light filtered in through the curtains, warm, quiet, gentle. The kind of morning that felt like a clean slate. A reset. A breath. For a moment, I just lay there, listening. Not for footsteps. Not for shouting. Not for another crisis. Just listening. Birds outside. A car door down the street. The subtle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Normal sounds. Good sounds. And it hit me how long it had been since my mornings felt like mine. Eventually, I reached for my phone. And even though I'd gone to bed telling myself I wouldn't check, curiosity tugged at me. Notifications flooded the screen. 23 unread messages. 19 Facebook tags. A handful of missed calls. I exhaled slowly. Here we go. I opened the messages first, starting with the most unexpected one. It was from the pastor's wife. A woman who had rarely made eye contact with me during the years my ex-husband and I attended church functions. A woman who used to say things like, "Marriage is about sacrifice, dear," whenever I'd show up tired from work while my ex lounged with the other men. Her message was short. Surprisingly short. "Harper, I heard what happened. I had no idea. I'm truly sorry." I stared at the words, blinking. No excuses. No backhanded comments. No lectures wrapped in righteousness. Just, sorry. Another buzz. A message from someone I barely remembered, a woman who used to sit behind us during Sunday service. "Your daughters didn't deserve any of that. If you ever need help, just ask." My chest tightened, not painfully, just unexpectedly. Then I opened Facebook. And wow. Just wow. Whoever said churches don't gossip has clearly never stepped foot in one. The post in the private group, the one filled with lies and accusations from my ex-mother-in-law, was gone. Deleted. In its place were dozens of comments from people calling out how cruel and manipulative the whole situation was. And then I saw it. A public post. Not from me. Not from Mark. Not from anyone who knew me well. It was from a quiet, older member named Linda. A woman who always knitted during Bible study and rarely spoke. Her post read, "Before you defend someone, make sure you know the full story." Some people wear grief like a mask to cover behavior they've been practicing for years. Under it, hundreds of likes. I sat back against my pillow, stunned. They weren't just turning against my ex-in-laws. They were waking up. For the first time, the truth wasn't just heard. It was believed. And that was worth more than any apology I'd ever receive. A soft knock on my door pulled me back. A second later, my youngest poked her head in, hair messy, still wearing the oversized pajama shirt she loved. "Mom? Are you awake?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Come in." She walked over to the bed and climbed in beside me, curling against my side like she used to do when she was little. Her voice was soft, unsure. "I saw some of the posts last night. On accident. I didn't mean to scroll, but it popped up." I put an arm around her shoulders, bracing myself. "And?" She hesitated. "Then, they're defending us." The relief in her voice, small but real, hit me like a wave. She'd been carrying so much. More than she ever should have. "I'm glad they are," I whispered. She stayed quiet for a moment before murmuring, "Mom, thank you." "For what?" "For protecting us. Even when people were awful. Even when it wasn't fair. Even when it was really scary." My throat tightened. "You don't ever have to thank me for that," I said, brushing her hair back. "It's my job to keep you safe. And I always will." She rested her head against my shoulder again. And in that stillness, I felt something settle inside me, a peace, steady and anchored. Eventually, she looked up and asked the most unexpected question. "So, what happens now?" A year ago, I would have had no answer. 6 months ago, I would have panicked. But today? Today, I felt solid. "What happens now," I said slowly, "is we live our lives. We move forward. And we stop giving people power they never deserved." She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. A real smile. A hopeful one. Down the hallway, my older daughter called out that breakfast was ready, a miracle in itself, considering she usually avoided cooking anything that required more than toast. We got out of bed and headed toward the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon and sugar drifted down the hall. She'd made French toast. I paused for a moment in the doorway, watching them move around the kitchen, laughing, clattering dishes, teasing each other. Living. Healing. Growing. And I realized, this moment was my real revenge. Not the binders. Not the church gossip. Not the shaming or the fallout. But this. My girls smiling again. Safe. Protected. Finally free from people who used love like a weapon. I stepped into the kitchen. "All right," I said lightly, grabbing plates. "Who burned what?" They both groaned. And just like that, laughter filled our home again. Something I hadn't really heard, in far too long. And deep inside, I knew. We were going to be okay. Maybe for the first time ever. The morning unfolded gently, almost deceptively normal. We sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight slanting in through the window, warming the wood, catching dust in the air like floating sparks. My daughters bickered about syrup, debated whose turn it was to do dishes, and for a few brief minutes, everything felt ordinary. But beneath that calm was a current. A quiet shift. A sense that something unfinished waited for us outside the walls of our home. The world doesn't just explode one day and fix itself the next. It leaves aftershocks. And ours came exactly 3 hours later. I was wiping down the counter when my phone buzzed again, this time with a call, not a message. A name flashed across the screen. Pastor Lewis. I froze. For years, that man had been a presence in my life. Weddings. Holidays. Hospital visits. He had blessed our home when we bought it, baptized both my girls, prayed with me the night my ex died. And he had also looked away for more than he ever should have. I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Hello?" His tone was gentle, too gentle. "Harper, I think we should talk." I let out a breath through my nose, slow and controlled. "About what?" "About what happened yesterday," he said. "And this morning." Meaning. The binders. The gossip storm. The truth that hit his congregation like a tidal wave. My eyes flicked toward the living room where my daughters were curled up with blankets and a movie. Pastor, I'm not going to discuss anything involving my daughters. That's not why I'm calling, he said quickly. I'm calling because the situation has caused quite a stir. Translation. People were talking. People were angry. People wanted answers. Your former in-laws are deeply upset, he continued. Confused. Humiliated. I didn't sugarcoat my reply. They lied, I said. They harassed my daughters. They put our safety at risk. They used your church to spread manipulative stories about children who are grieving. I understand, he said, and I'm not defending their actions. But he was. I could hear it. That subtle layer of sympathy beneath the words. He sighed heavily. Harper, you've always been a reasonable person. This public exposure, it's gone a bit far. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge. So there it was. The expected tone. The expected pivot. The expected attempt to soften the blow for two elderly manipulators who had weaponized faith for decades. Pastor, I said calmly, do you know what those women your church sent said to my daughter? Do you know she called me crying, terrified, while 6 strangers screamed at her about being a bad sister? He stayed silent. I continued. Do you know what it does to a child to be blamed for their father's death? His breath caught. Harper. I had no idea. No, I said quietly. You didn't. Because they didn't want you to. Another pause. They told lies about my daughters. They put us in danger. They nearly convinced people we abandoned them. And you want to talk about what I did? He exhaled again, soft, defeated. I'm asking, he said gently, if you would consider coming in. To speak with the congregation. To clear the air. I almost laughed. You want me to fix the mess she created? No, he said. Only to bring peace. Peace. A word that had been used against me so many times. Peace when my ex gaslit me. Peace when his parents criticized me. Peace when I tried to speak up about the affair and was told to pray harder. I finally said, I'll come if my daughters want me to. But I won't go alone. That's fair, he murmured. But Pastor. I added. Yes. Next time someone posts a lie about a grieving teenager, maybe take a minute before believing it. He didn't have a response. Goodbye, Pastor, I said and clicked off. I set my phone down, feeling the tension unwind from between my shoulders. A moment later, my eldest appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Was that who I think it was? I nodded. What did he want? To smooth things over, I said. She scoffed. Of course. But then her expression shifted, softening. Mom? Are we safe? Like, they can't actually take us anywhere, right? She tried to hide the tremor in her voice, but I saw it. The fear wasn't gone. Not yet. I walked over and pulled her into my arms. You're safe, I whispered firmly. I promise you, no one is taking you from this house. No one is dragging you into a courtroom and winning. No one is going to control you ever again. She buried her face in my shoulder, breathing shakily. We stayed like that until she finally let go, wiping her cheeks like she didn't want me to notice she'd been crying. I don't want to go to that church, she said. Then we won't, I assured her. Not unless you choose to. She gave a slow nod and went back to the living room. I stood there, letting the quiet settle, letting the weight of the moment wash through me. Some battles were loud. Some were ugly. Some ripped open wounds you thought were long scarred over. But others were fought in gentle conversations. In reassurances. In showing up for your children even when the world felt unsteady. The truth was, this wasn't over. There would be fallout. There would be conversations. There would be consequences for exposing the truth so publicly. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel scared of what was coming. I felt ready. And maybe even a little steady. The day after Pastor Lewis called, I woke up with that peculiar feeling like the air in the house had shifted. Not in a threatening way, but in the way a room feels after someone opens a window and lets the truth in. Clearer. Sharper. Colder in a way that wakes you up. I brewed coffee and stood by the sink, watching steam rise as the sky blushed pink over the rooftops. My daughters were still sleeping. The house was quiet, almost peaceful, but I knew better. Peace doesn't come without a price. And the church wasn't done with us. By mid-morning, the messages began. Not from Pastor Lewis. From the women who had cornered my daughter at the market. Their names glowed on my screen, names I remembered from potlucks and holiday services. Women who had hugged me tightly when I first joined the congregation. Women who had prayed over my girls when they had fevers. Women who used to press homemade cookies into my hands and tell me how strong I was for keeping our family together. Women who had turned on us the moment my XML fed them a story sweet enough to mask the poison underneath. The first message read, "We'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. As if they'd bumped into her cart at the grocery store instead of surrounding her like a pack. The next, "We didn't mean to upset your daughter. We were only trying to support your mother-in-law." And another, "Our intentions were pure." I put my phone down. Pure intentions don't leave a teenager crying into her sleeves in front of a crowd of strangers. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of clarity. People show you exactly who they are when someone tells them a lie dressed up as virtue. A few minutes later, my eldest wandered into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes puffy from sleep. "You're up early," I said softly. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and leaned against the counter. "I saw some messages coming in," she murmured. "Are they from them?" "Yeah," I admitted. She rolled her eyes so hard it almost echoed. "I don't know why they even bother. If they actually cared, they would have listened to us months ago." Her voice cracked just enough to break something inside me. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "We're not giving them space in our lives anymore," I said. "They can apologize into the void for all I care." She managed a small smile and took her juice to the table. A moment later, my youngest shuffled in, yawning, rubbing her eyes. "Mom," she mumbled, voice still heavy with sleep. "Do we have to go to the meeting at the church?" So she'd heard more of my phone call with the pastor than I realized. I shook my head. "Not unless you want to." She dropped into a chair, relief melting across her face. "Good," she whispered. "I don't want to see any of those people." I walked over and brushed a piece of hair behind her ear. "You won't have to," I promised. But even as I said it, my phone buzzed again. A new message. This one, from someone I didn't expect. From an unfamiliar number. "Harper, this is Angela." I frowned. Angela. It took a moment, then I remembered. My ex's cousin. Someone who had drifted out of our lives years ago. Quiet. Observant. Not particularly close to my ex's parents. There was a second message. "I think you should know something." My stomach tightened, not out of fear, but anticipation. I opened the message fully. "Your ex-mother-in-law is telling people she had nothing to do with the Facebook post. She's saying you staged everything to make her look cruel." I blinked, then laughed. A humorless, stunned kind of laugh that lives somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. Angela continued. "She's pretending she didn't know about the binders and is claiming you forged everything." My fingers curled around my phone. Forged. Right. Because I had apparently hired actors to recreate my ex and his affair partner kissing in my living room. Because I created deepfake messages from her own phone number telling my daughters they were the reason their father died. Because I somehow forced her to recruit 6 church women to confront my daughter at a market. I typed back, "Thank you for telling me. How are people reacting?" A moment passed before her reply came in. "Not well. Half the church is furious with her. The other half thinks you're overreacting. But no one believes she's innocent anymore. You should know, though, she's calling a meeting with the pastor today." I stared at those words. A meeting. A final attempt to manipulate the narrative. To regain sympathy. To reclaim authority in a community she once dominated with fear and whispers. I put my phone down and inhaled deeply. "Girls," I said quietly. "I need to step out for a little while today. Just an hour." My youngest looked up. "Where?" "To take care of something," I said. "Something I should have done a long time ago." My eldest narrowed her eyes, instantly suspicious. "Are you going to the church?" I hesitated, then nodded. "But I'm not going because they asked me to," I said. "I'm going because she's telling more lies, and I won't let them land." Silence. Then my eldest said, "Do you want us to come?" My heart squeezed. As much as I wanted their support, this battle wasn't theirs. It never should have been in the first place. No, I said firmly. You've been dragged through too much already. Let me handle this. She didn't argue, but the worry lingered in her eyes. I kissed the top of her head. Then my youngest's. I won't be long, I promised. And as I grabbed my keys and stepped into the sunlight, something settled in my chest. A certainty. A steadiness. A quiet understanding that this moment, this meeting, this confrontation, wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ending something that had hovered over my family for years. It was about closure. About finally claiming the peace that had always been stolen from us. I drove to the church, its white steeple sharp against the sky, its parking lot dotted with cars. I recognized a few immediately. People who hadn't spoken to me in years. Elderly couples who used to bring pies to our house on Thanksgiving. Young mothers who once shared parenting tips with me in the foyer. I parked, stepped out, and took in the familiar scent of coastal air mixed with warm pavement. My footsteps echoed as I approached the doors. Before I reached them, I heard voices inside, angry, loud, layered over each other like waves breaking on rocks. And then I heard hers. My ex-mother-in-law. Trembling. Dramatic. Cracking with theatrical hurt. She's tearing our family apart, she cried. She's punishing us because she can't let go of the past. I paused outside the door. Listened. A man spoke next, firm, frustrated. Maybe one of the deacons. You lied to everyone, Margaret. You lied about the boys, about your son, about the surrogate story. That wasn't a lie, she snapped. A second voice cut in. Then how do you explain the photographs? The messages? The emails? There was a rustle. Papers. Someone flipping through the binder. Then, I don't know how she got those. I smiled slowly. She was cornered. And she knew it. But this wasn't the moment for my entrance. Not yet. If I walked in now, she'd latch onto the distraction like a lifeline. No. I would wait until she had exhausted every lie, every excuse, every last ounce of her false righteousness. I leaned against the wall outside the door, closed my eyes, and listened as her voice cracked, rose, and eventually began to fall apart. She rambled. Contradicted herself. Blamed her age, her grief, her poor broken heart. And finally, something shifted. Someone in the room said, voice cold enough to chill the hallway. You owe Harper and her daughters an apology. Silence. Then, I will not apologize to her. There it was. The truth behind everything. She didn't want reconciliation. She didn't want peace. She didn't want healing. She wanted control. She wanted power. And she hated that I had taken it back. That was my cue. I opened the door. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Eyes widened. And my ex-mother-in-law froze mid-sentence, her face draining of color. I stepped inside, shoulders squared, calm as the ocean before a storm. Don't stop on my account, I said softly. You were saying? The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan overhead. My ex-mother-in-law, Margaret, stood in the center, gripping a stack of papers like they were a shield instead of evidence of her own lies. Her husband sat beside her, staring at the floor as if he wanted to sink through it. The pastor, 2 deacons, and half a dozen longtime members turned to me, shock frozen on their faces. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm in. I simply stepped forward and said, continue, Margaret. You were explaining how I forged years of your messages. Her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. I don't owe you anything, she snapped. This is our church. These are our friends. I nodded slowly. Right. And that's exactly why you thought you could lie without consequences. A murmur rippled through the room. I walked to the table where my binder lay open, photographs facing upward like truth staring directly into the light. Everyone here has seen the evidence, I said. I didn't hide anything. I didn't twist anything. I didn't add dramatic stories about imaginary surrogates or pretend my daughters were villains. I just showed the truth. I turned to her fully. And the truth is, you harassed my daughters. You blamed them for their father's death. You lied about me. You lied about those boys. You lied about everything to protect an image you've been polishing for decades. She let out a sharp breath. You ruined our reputation. I looked at her, really looked. At the panic behind her indignation. at the fear beneath the bluster. "No," I replied. "Your actions ruined it. I just stopped covering for you." Someone near the back whispered, "She has a point." Another said, "This has gone on too long." Margaret whipped around, eyes wild as if betrayed. "These are lies," she cried. "Harper has always been dramatic. Even when my son was alive." "Don't," I cut in. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Don't use him as a weapon. Not anymore." A brittle silence followed. Then Pastor Lewis spoke, his tone firmer than I'd heard in years. "Margaret, the church leadership has decided you and your husband need to step back from all church activities until further notice." She gasped. "You're choosing her over us?" "No," he answered. "We're choosing accountability." Her face went pale. Her husband reached for her arm, quietly defeated, but she yanked away. "You'll regret this," she spat at me. I met her stare evenly. "I already regret letting it go on this long." I turned toward the door, but before leaving, I added, "My daughters will never set foot in a place that excuses harassment. If this church wants to be different, prove it." Then I walked out, letting the heavy door close behind me. Outside, the sunlight was bright, almost blinding. The air smelled like warm earth and sea breeze. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest lift. When I got home, my daughters were on the couch, waiting. "Well," my eldest said. I smiled, not triumphant, not smug. Just free. "They won't bother us anymore." My youngest let out a breath she'd been holding for months. "Good," she whispered. I sank onto the couch between them, pulling them close. We didn't need a church meeting to validate our truth. We didn't need apologies crafted from shame instead of sincerity. We didn't need anyone's approval. We had each other. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's not explosive. Sometimes it's simply living without the people who tried to break you. Sometimes it's walking away with your dignity while there's crumbles in public. As my daughters leaned into me, quiet and safe, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They could shout. They could lie. They could twist and spin and manipulate. But they could never touch us again. And that was the sweetest victory of all.